Most people looked at Sarah and saw a waitress who cleaned up crumbs for minimum wage. But Sterling Paris, the billionaire CEO of Paris Holdings, was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought his $300 million acquisition was a done deal. He was wrong. In the high-stakes world of Manhattan finance, the person who holds the power isn't always the one sitting at the head of the table. Sometimes it's the girl pouring the water. This is the story of how a spilled glass of Pinot Noir and a nobody waitress saved a dynasty from collapsing and exposed a secret that would shatter Wall Street. The air inside L'Argent, Manhattan's most exclusive French dining room, smelled of browned butter, truffle oil, and desperate ambition. It was a smell Sarah Taylor knew well. It was the scent of men who had everything but were terrified of losing it. Sarah adjusted the waist apron that cut into her hips. She was 27, but the dark circles under her eyes made her look older. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, mandated by management, and her uniform was spotless. It had to be. In a place where a bottle of wine cost more than her rent in Queens, invisibility was the goal. Table 4 needs water, now. The floor manager, a weasel of a man named Claude, hissed into her ear as he breezed past. Table 4, the power table. It was occupied by 3 men in bespoke suits that cost more than a Honda Civic. In the center sat Sterling Paris. Even if you didn't read the Wall Street Journal, you knew Sterling. He was 34, possessed a jawline that looked carved from granite, and had a reputation for eating companies and people alive. He was the CEO of Paris Holdings, a private equity firm that had been aggressively buying up logistics companies across the globe. Tonight was the endgame. Sarah moved silently toward the table with a crystal pitcher. As she poured, she didn't look at their faces, rule number 1, but she couldn't help but hear. "The Japanese won't budge on the valuation, Sterling," said the man to his right. This was Preston Hayes, the VP of Operations. He was older, sweating through his collar, and looked like he was about to have a stroke. Takahashi Heavy Industries is a family legacy. They don't care about our EBITDA. They care about heritage. If we push for the restructuring clause tonight, they walk. Sterling didn't look up from his phone. His fingers flew across the screen. "They won't walk, Preston. They're bleeding cash. They need our capital to modernize. Old man Takahashi is proud, not stupid. We push the clause. I want full control of the board within 6 months, or I pull the offer." "Sterling, please," Preston whispered, glancing around the room as if the walls had ears. "Kenji Takahashi is flying in personally. This isn't a Zoom call. If you insult his honor, the $300 million credit line we leveraged from Chase goes up in smoke. We're overexposed. If this deal fails, Paris Holdings is insolvent by Tuesday." Sarah's hand trembled slightly. Insolvent. Bankrupt. She knew that word. It was the word that had taken her father's house. It was the word that had pulled her out of her PhD program at Cambridge 3 years ago. "Watch it," Sterling snapped. Sarah froze. A single drop of condensation from the pitcher had fallen onto the table, inches from Sterling's phone. He looked up at her for the first time. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, devoid of empathy. He didn't see a human being. He saw a malfunction in the machinery of his evening. "I'm so sorry, sir," Sarah said, her voice low. She reached for the napkin in her apron. "Don't," Sterling said, raising a hand. "Just go. Get someone else to serve this table. Someone who can pour water without causing a flood." "Sterling, relax," Preston muttered. "I don't have time to relax, Preston. I have 30 minutes before the Japanese delegation arrives to sign over their life's work. I need perfection." He glared at Sarah. "Go." Sarah retreated, her cheeks burning. She walked back to the service station, her knuckles white as she gripped the pitcher. "He's a charm, isn't he?" Sarah looked up. It was Marco, the sommelier. He was polishing a glass. "Don't let him get to you, Sarah. Sterling Paris is a shark. Sharks don't have manners." "He's stressed," Sarah said quietly, looking back at the table. Sterling was rubbing his temples, a gesture of extreme fatigue that the cameras never caught. "He thinks he's buying a logistics company. He doesn't realize he's buying a philosophy." Marco paused. "What?" Sarah shook her head, realizing she'd said too much. "Nothing. Just, Table 4 needs a new server. He kicked me off. I'll take it, Marco sighed. You handle the private booth in the back. Safer there. Sarah nodded, but her eyes lingered on Sterling. She had recognized the name Takahashi. During her doctoral research in behavioral economics and East Asian corporate anthropology, she had written a 40-page case study on Takahashi Heavy Industries. They weren't just a company, they were a feudal state operating in the 21st century. Sterling Paris was planning to walk in there with a sledgehammer. He needed a scalpel, and he had just fired the only person in the building who knew how to use one. The atmosphere in L'Argent shifted at 8:00 p.m. sharply. The main doors opened and the maitre d' bowed lower than usual. Kenji Takahashi walked in. He was 70 years old, wearing a dark suit that looked simple but was tailored with agonizing precision. He was flanked by 2 younger men, his sons likely, and a translator. The air around table 4 grew heavy. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. He put on his game face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah was serving soup to an elderly couple in the booth nearby, but she had a direct line of sight. She couldn't look away. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. "Mr. Takahashi," Sterling boomed, extending his hand across the table. "Welcome to New York. I trust the flight was comfortable?" Kenji took the hand briefly, his grip light. He nodded but didn't speak. The translator, a nervous young woman, stepped forward. "Mr. Takahashi thanks you for the invitation. He is honored to meet you." They sat. The tension was palpable. "Let's get right to it," Sterling said, opening his leather portfolio. "We've reviewed the financials you sent over last night. Paris Holdings is ready to move forward with the acquisition at the agreed price of $300 million, provided we sign the restructuring agreement tonight." Preston, the VP, kicked Sterling under the table. Sarah saw the tablecloth ripple. "You didn't start business with a Japanese traditionalist before the drinks were even ordered." Kenji Takahashi stared at Sterling. He said something in Japanese, his voice low and gravelly. "My father asks," the translator said, "if you have had a chance to look at the gift he sent to your office this morning." Sterling blinked. He looked at Preston. "Gift?" Preston went pale. "The crate? The wooden crate?" "Sterling, I think the secretary put it in storage. We were busy with the audit." Sterling waved his hand dismissively. "Ah, yes, the box. Thank you, Mr. Takahashi. Very kind. But regarding the board seats..." Kenji Takahashi's face went stone cold. He placed his hands flat on the table. He spoke again, sharper this time. The translator looked terrified. "Mr. Takahashi says that box contained a 50-year-old bonsai white pine grown by his grandfather. It represents the longevity and patience required for this partnership. If you have placed it in storage without opening it, perhaps you do not understand the nature of this union." Sterling sighed, clearly annoyed by the theatrics. "Mr. Takahashi, with all due respect, we are buying your debt. We are saving your company. A tree is a nice gesture, but we are here to talk about assets." Silence. The entire restaurant seemed to go quiet. Kenji Takahashi slowly stood up. "Sterling, fix this," Preston hissed. "Sit down, Kenji," Sterling said, his voice hardening. "If you walk out that door, the bank sees your assets by Friday. You need me." Kenji looked at the translator. "Tell him." The translator's voice shook. "Mr. Takahashi says, there are things more important than money. Honor is one of them. The deal is off." The delegation turned to leave. Sterling sat there, stunned. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He had played hardball and he had struck out. The $300 million deal, and his own company, was dissolving before his eyes. Sarah dropped a spoon. It clattered loudly on the floor. She wasn't thinking. Her body moved on autopilot. The memories of her father sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands after the bank took their home, flooded her mind. She hated men like Sterling Paris, but she hated waste even more. And this was a waste of a historic magnitude. She stepped out from the shadows of the booth. "Wait." The room turned. Sterling looked at her with fury. "You? I told you to get lost." Sarah ignored him. She walked straight toward Kenji Takahashi. She stopped 3 feet away and performed a bow. Not the shallow nod Sterling had given, but a deep 45-degree bow, holding it for a full 3 seconds. When she straightened up, she looked Kenji in the eye and spoke. Not in English, in flawless, formal Keigo Japanese. "Takahashi-sama, please forgive the impertinence of a humble server, but the tree you sent, it was a Yamaki pine, was it not? One that survived the fires of the showroom in 1945? Kenji stopped. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. He looked at this waitress in her stained apron and messy bun. "You know of the Yamaki?" he asked in Japanese. Sarah nodded. "I studied the history of your family's cultivation techniques during my time at university. The white pine represents not just patience, but resilience against fire. Mr. Paris did not put it in storage because he did not care. He put it in storage because he believed it was too precious to be kept in a busy office until he could find a pedestal worthy of it." She lied. It was a bold-faced, desperate lie. She turned to Sterling, switching to English. "Tell him you ordered a climate-controlled glass case for the lobby. Tell him right now." Sterling stared at her. He was a shark, and sharks knew when there was blood in the water. He didn't understand what she had said in Japanese, but he saw Kenji waiting. "Yes," Sterling stammered, standing up. "My assistant. She's right. I didn't want the air conditioning in the office to dry out the needles. We have a humidor case arriving tomorrow. It will be the centerpiece of the atrium." Kenji looked from Sarah to Sterling. The silence stretched for an agonizing 10 seconds. Then the old man's shoulders relaxed. He sat back down. "A man who protects the roots," Kenji said in English, his accent thick. "May be trusted with the branches." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "But I will not speak to you alone, Mr. Paris. I want her to translate." He pointed a withered finger at Sarah. "Me?" Sarah whispered. "Her?" Sterling scoffed. "She's a waitress." "She understands my history," Kenji said firmly. "You do not. She stays. Or I go." Sterling looked at Sarah. The disdain was still there, but it was now warring with desperation. He motioned to the empty chair next to him. "Sit down," Sterling commanded. Sarah hesitated. She looked at Claude, the manager, who was hyperventilating by the wine rack. She looked at her apron. "Take off the apron," Sterling muttered. Sarah untied the waist apron, revealing her black slacks. She sat down at the table, surrounded by $5,000 suits and the wreckage of a negotiation. "What is your name?" Sterling asked, not looking at her, opening a fresh file. "Sarah," she said. "All right, Sarah," Sterling said, his voice low and dangerous. "You just bought me another hour. Don't make me regret it." The next 3 hours were a blur of legalese, sushi, and high-wire diplomacy. Sarah didn't just translate words, she translated intent. When Sterling pushed too hard on the restructuring of the Kyoto plant, Sarah softened the language, framing it as modernizing the legacy facilities to ensure they last another 100 years. When Kenji expressed concerns about foreign wolves, Sarah translated it to Sterling as concerns about employee retention and cultural fit, signaling him to mention the pension guarantees. She was conducting a symphony between a sledgehammer and a violin. By 11:30 p.m., the preliminary heads of terms were signed on a napkin. Kenji Takahashi stood up, looking tired but satisfied. He bowed to Sterling, but he bowed deeper to Sarah. "You have a sharp mind, child," Kenji said in Japanese. "Why are you carrying plates?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Debts, Takahashi-sama, we all have debts." Kenji nodded and left the restaurant with his entourage. The moment the door clicked shut, the adrenaline crashed out of Sarah's system. Her hands started shaking again. She realized she was sitting at the best table in New York, drinking tepid water, next to a man worth $4 billion. Sterling Paris didn't cheer. He didn't high-five Preston. He slumped back in his chair, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding since 8 p.m. He turned his head and looked at Sarah. Really looked at her. "Where did you learn to speak Japanese like that?" "Cambridge," Sarah said. "I was a doctoral candidate. My focus was cross-cultural negotiation dynamics." "And now you serve steak." "Life happens, Mr. Paris." Sarah stood up. "I should go. My manager is going to fire me for sitting with a guest." "He won't," Sterling said, "because you don't work for him anymore." Sarah froze. "Excuse me?" Sterling pulled a checkbook from his jacket pocket. He uncapped a fountain pen, a Mont Blanc, Sarah noted. He scribbled something and tore it out. He slid it across the table. Sarah looked at it. It was a check for $50,000. "This is a joke," she said. "The deal isn't done," Sterling said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "That was just the handshake. The official signing is in 48 hours. The lawyers are drafting the final purchase agreement now. Kenji trusts you. If you aren't in that room on Friday, he'll get spooked and pull out." "I'm a waitress, Mr. Paris. I can't just—" "You're a consultant," Sterling corrected, "for the next 2 days. I need you to vet every document, every email, every interaction with the Japanese team. You know their culture, you know their triggers. I want you to bulletproof this deal. And if I say no, then you go back to pouring water and I lose my company. And frankly, Sarah, you look like someone who could use 50 grand. He was arrogant. He was manipulative. He was right. $50,000 would pay off her father's medical bills. It would get the debt collectors off her back. It was a lifeline. Sarah reached out and took the check. "I have conditions." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating already?" "I'm not your assistant. I'm not your servant. If I see a mistake, I call it out, even if it's yours, especially if it's yours." Sterling stared at her. A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. It was the first time he looked genuinely interested. "Deal. Be at Paris Holdings, 34th floor, 7:00 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." "And Sarah?" "Yes? Burn that outfit. We'll get you something that doesn't smell like French fries." He walked out, leaving Sarah standing alone in the empty restaurant. Preston, the VP, was gathering the papers. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Be careful," Preston whispered as he passed her. "Sterling loves things that are useful, but the second you stop being useful, he discards you. Watch your back." Sarah looked at the check in her hand. She had just stepped out of the frying pan and into the fire. At 6:45 a.m. the next morning, Sarah stood outside the towering glass monolith of Paris Holdings in Midtown Manhattan. She felt absurd. She was wearing her only suit, a charcoal grey number she'd bought for interviews 5 years ago that was slightly too tight in the shoulders, and carrying a battered leather satchel that contained a ham sandwich. She looked up at the building that scraped the sky. This was the temple of modern capitalism, a place where fortunes were made in seconds and lives were ruined with a keystroke. And for 48 hours, she had a backstage pass. She pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was a cavern of Italian marble and security guards who looked like ex-Navy SEALs. "Sarah Taylor, I'm here to see Mr. Paris," she told the severe woman at the front desk. The receptionist didn't even look up. "Mr. Paris does not take unscheduled appointments. If you wish to leave a resume, the drop box is by the—" "Tell him the bonsai consultant is here," Sarah interrupted, her voice louder than she intended. The receptionist froze. Her eyes snapped up to Sarah, scanning her cheap suit with practiced disdain, but she picked up the phone. A moment later, her face paled. "Mr. Paris's executive assistant is on her way down. Right away, Ms. Taylor." The attitude shift was whiplash-inducing. 2 minutes later, a flawlessly coiffed woman named Chloe whisked Sarah past security and into a private elevator that shot upward so fast Sarah's ears popped. The 34th floor was silent, plush, and smelled of money and ozone. It was an open-plan office filled with analysts staring intently at 3 screen setups, their faces illuminated by the green and red glow of market tickers. Sterling Paris was waiting in his corner office, a space larger than Sarah's entire apartment. The view of Central Park was breathtaking, a sprawling green oasis framed by the concrete jungle. Sterling didn't say hello. He was pacing, a Bluetooth earpiece jammed in his ear, barking orders at someone in London about liquidity ratios. He gestured vaguely at a chair in front of his desk. Sarah sat. She placed her battered satchel on the floor next to an $80,000 Eames chair. Sterling ended the call and turned to her. He looked fresh, energized, a predator scenting blood. "You're late. It's 7:03. "The elevator took 3 minutes," Sarah replied calmly. "Where do I start?" Sterling pressed an intercom button on his desk. "Chloe, send in the stylist." A door opened and a man in a black turtleneck entered, carrying huge garment bags, followed by a woman with a makeup kit loaded like an assault rifle. "What is this?" Sarah asked, standing up. You are representing Paris Holdings, Sterling said, looking her up and down critically. Kenji Takahashi respects tradition, he also respects power. That suit screams, Junior Assistant Deputy Manager. We need you to scream killer. Sarah wanted to argue, to tell him her brain was what mattered, not her clothes. But she remembered the check in her pocket. $50,000. She sat back down. For the next hour, Sarah was poked, prodded, fitted, and painted. It wasn't a makeover designed to make her feel beautiful, it was the application of war paint. When they were done, Sarah looked in the full-length mirror and didn't recognize herself. She was wearing a tailored navy power suit by Alexander McQueen that fit like a second skin. Her hair was in a sleek architectural bob. The makeup was severe, accentuating her cheekbones and making her green eyes look dangerous. She looked 5 years older and 10 times richer. Sterling nodded, barely looking up from his iPad. Better. Now the war room. He led her into an adjacent conference room where Preston Hayes, the sweaty VP from the restaurant, was sitting with another executive. Sarah Taylor, this is Veronica Vale, our Chief Financial Officer, Sterling introduced curtly. Veronica Vale was striking. She was perhaps 40, with ice-blonde hair and a stillness about her that was unsettling. She looked at Sarah the way a scientist looks at a new bacterium under a microscope. The waitress, Veronica said. Her voice was smooth, cool, and utterly dismissive. Sterling, this is highly irregular. Our legal department is having a collective aneurysm about letting an unvetted civilian access the Takahashi data room. She's vetted by me, Sterling snapped. And considering you and Preston almost tanked the deal last night because you don't know the difference between a pine tree and a potted plant, I'd say we need the irregularity. Sarah is here for cultural due diligence. Give her access to everything. Full clearance. Veronica's jaw tightened, but she nodded. As you wish. The rest of the day was a grueling marathon. Sarah was installed at a desk in the corner of the war room, surrounded by boxes of documents that hadn't been digitized. The lawyers were handling the contracts, but Sterling wanted Sarah to look at the correspondence. 20 years of letters, internal memos, and meeting minutes from Takahashi Heavy Industries, all in dense, formal Japanese. She read until her eyes burned. She skipped lunch, surviving on black coffee that Chloe brought her every hour. Sterling, Preston, and Veronica argued around her, their voices a constant background noise of EBITDA, leverage ratios, and severance packages. They ignored her, which suited Sarah perfectly. Invisibility was her superpower. Around 4 p.m., Sarah found it. It was in a memo dated 3 years prior, deep in a folder labeled Miscellaneous Asset Review. It was a summary of a board meeting where Kenji Takahashi's son, Hiroshi, had proposed a radical modernization plan. He wanted to spin off the company's crown jewel, the robotics R&D division in Kyoto, into a separate entity to attract foreign venture capital. Kenji had furiously shot it down. The minutes recorded Kenji saying, "The soul of Takahashi is in Kyoto. To sell the mind and keep only the body is suicide. We will never separate them." Sarah sat back, her heart pounding. This was the emotional core of the company. Then she opened the draft purchase agreement that Paris Holdings lawyers had prepared. She scrolled to Appendix D, post-acquisition restructuring. There it was. Hidden under layers of obfuscating legal jargon was a clause titled Strategic Asset Realignment. It authorized Paris Holdings to evaluate and, if deemed fiscally prudent, divest non-core R&D assets located in the Kyoto prefecture within 12 months of acquisition. It was a trap, a poison pill buried so deep even Kenji's lawyers hadn't spotted it yet. If Kenji signed this, Sterling would legally be able to sell the soul of the company behind his back. "Mr. Paris," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise of the room. Sterling was arguing with Veronica about interest rates. He held up a hand to silence Sarah. "Not now, Sarah." "Now, Mr. Paris, it's about Kyoto." The mention of Kyoto made the room go quiet. Sterling walked over to her desk. "What is it?" Sarah showed him the memo, translating Kenji's passionate defense of the R&D division. Then she showed him the clause in the contract. "If Kenji sees this clause," Sarah said quietly, "he will know you plan to betray him the moment the ink is dry. He won't just walk away. He'll declare war on Paris Holdings in the press. He'll say you tried to trick an honorable man." Sterling read the clause. His face darkened. He looked up at Preston, then at Veronica. "Who put this in?" Sterling demanded, his voice low and terrifying. "We agreed to leave the R&D division alone for at least 5 years to appease the old man. Who changed the timeline to 12 months? Preston looked like he was going to faint. I don't know, Sterling. The lawyers must have made a drafting error." "Lawyers don't make errors like that," Sterling snarled. "This was intentional. Someone in this room is trying to sabotage this deal." His eyes locked on Veronica. Veronica didn't flinch. She sipped her sparkling water. "Don't look at me, Sterling. I've been arguing that the R&D division is a cash drain for months. I was open about wanting to cut it, but I wouldn't sneak it into a contract. That's sloppy." "Fix it." Sterling pointed a finger at Preston. "Get legal on the phone, tear that clause out, burn it, and if I find out who did this, they'll never work in finance again." Preston scrambled out of the room. Sterling turned back to Sarah. The look he gave her was complicated. It was fury mixed with begrudging respect. "Good catch," he muttered. "You just earned your 50 grand. Sarah didn't feel triumphant. She felt sick. She was sitting in a viper's nest. Sterling was the king cobra, but he wasn't the only snake. Someone here wanted him to fail, and they didn't care if they burned down a 100-year-old Japanese legacy to do it. As Sterling marched away to scream at someone over the phone, Sarah felt eyes on her. She looked up. Veronica Vale was watching her from across the room. The CFO raised her glass of water in a mock toast, a small, icy smile playing on her lips. It was a look that said, "You may have won this round, little waitress. But the game isn't over." The atmosphere in Paris Holdings on Thursday, the day before the signing, was toxic. The discovery of the sabotaged clause had turned Sterling into a paranoid tyrant. He was screaming at everyone. Junior analysts were crying in the bathroom. Sarah kept her head down. She had moved on to reviewing the cultural integration plans for the post-merger employees. It was depressing work. Sterling's plan was essentially to bulldoze the traditional Japanese seniority system and replace it with a cutthroat American meritocracy overnight. It was going to be a disaster, and Sarah was busy writing margin notes detailing exactly why. By 8 p.m., the office had mostly cleared out. Only the core team remained in the war room. Sterling was shut in his office, brooding. Preston had gone home with a migraine. Sarah was exhausted. The adrenaline that had sustained her for 24 hours was fading, replaced by a bone-deep ache. She was rubbing her temples when a shadow fell over her desk. It was Veronica. "You look terrible," Veronica said, her voice surprisingly gentle. Sarah looked up, wary. "Long day." "Sterling rides everyone hard," Veronica said, sitting on the edge of Sarah's desk. She held out 2 steaming cups from the artisanal coffee shop downstairs. "Here, peace offering. I was harsh yesterday. You did good work spotting that clause." Sarah hesitated. She didn't trust Veronica at all. But the smell of the coffee, real high-quality espresso, was intoxicating. "Thanks," Sarah said, taking the cup. Veronica smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "You know, it's impressive. Sterling usually chews up outsiders and spits them out before lunch. You're still here." "He needs this deal," Sarah said, taking a sip. The coffee was delicious. "Oh, he needs it desperately," Veronica agreed. She leaned in closer, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sterling is over-leveraged. If this Takahashi acquisition fails, the banks call in his personal loans. He loses the company, he loses the Hamptons house, he loses everything. He's terrified." Sarah stared at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're smart, and you're about to be very rich and then very unemployed once this deal is signed tomorrow. I thought you should know the stakes." Veronica stood up, dusting off her skirt. "Anyway, don't stay too late. The cleaning crew gets aggressive with the vacuum." She walked away. Sarah watched her go, a strange feeling settling in her stomach. Why had the CFO of a multi-billion-dollar company just tried to bond with her? Sarah finished the coffee and returned to her work. A few minutes later, she needed to use the restroom. She left her keycard and her bag under her desk. A rookie mistake in a place like Paris Holdings, but she was tired. The hallway was deserted. When she returned 5 minutes later, everything looked exactly the same. But as she sat down, she noticed something. The zipper on her leather satchel was open about an inch. She was sure she'd closed it. Her heart rate kicked up. She pulled the bag onto her lap and rummaged through it. Wallet, keys, phone, the paperback book she read on the subway. Everything seemed to be there. Then her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic in the side pocket. She pulled it out. It was a silver USB flash drive. It wasn't hers. Sarah stared at the drive. A cold dread washed over her. The coffee, Veronica's sudden friendliness, the don't stay too late warning. It's a setup. She didn't know what was on the drive, but she knew it was poison. She had to get rid of it. She stood up fast, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She needed to find Sterling. She needed to tell him. But before she could take 2 steps, the doors to the war room slammed open. Sterling strode in, followed by 2 security guards and Veronica, who wore a look of grim satisfaction. Sterling's face was purple with rage. He held up a piece of paper. "Is this true?" he shouted at Sarah, throwing the paper onto her desk. It was an IT security log. It showed an unauthorized download of highly sensitive files, including the unredacted Takahashi client list and Paris Holdings' internal debt structure. At 8:15 p.m., 10 minutes ago, from Sarah's terminal. "I didn't download anything," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I've been reading personnel files." "Save it," Veronica cut in smoothly. "It flagged the data packet moving externally. We intercepted it before it left the firewall. Someone was trying to send our entire playbook to a competitor." "And guess whose login was used?" Sterling roared. He advanced on Sarah, invading her personal space. The charming, desperate man from the restaurant was gone. This was the shark that ate companies. "Sterling, please, listen to me," Sarah pleaded, backing away. "I didn't do this. Veronica came in here. She brought me coffee. I went to the bathroom." "Oh, spare me the innocent act," Veronica scoffed. "Sterling, she's a waitress desperate for cash. Someone got to her, probably the Japanese competitor. They offered her more than your 50 grand to leak the data." "Search her bag," Sterling ordered the guards. "No," Sarah cried as a guard grabbed her satchel. He dumped the contents onto the desk, the wallet, the phone, and the silver USB drive. The guard picked it up. "Found it, sir." Sterling snatched the drive. He looked at Sarah with pure, unadulterated hatred. "I trusted you. I brought you into my world. I gave you a chance to be something." "It was planted," Sarah yelled, tears stinging her eyes. "Veronica put it there. Check the cameras." "There are no cameras inside the war room, you idiot," Veronica said coldly, "for security reasons." Sterling crushed the USB drive in his fist. "You're fired, obviously." "Sterling, you're making a mistake," Sarah begged. "She's trying to kill the deal. She's the one who put the poison pill in the contract." "Veronica has been with me for 10 years, Sterling spat. "You've been here for 2 days. Who am I going to believe, the CFO or the girl who serves soup?" It was a dagger to the heart. All the respect she thought she had earned, all the value she had provided, it meant nothing. At the end of the day, to him, she was still just the help. "Get her out of here," Sterling told the guards, "and cancel her check. She doesn't get a dime." "You can't do that." "I just did. Be grateful I don't call the cops and have you thrown in prison for corporate espionage. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind." The guards grabbed Sarah by the arms, not gently. They dragged her past a smug-looking Veronica, out of the war room, through the plush lobby, and shoved her into the elevator. They escorted her all the way to the ground floor and pushed her out the revolving doors onto the cold Manhattan sidewalk. Sarah stumbled, catching herself on a lamppost. She was still wearing the $5,000 Alexander McQueen suit, but she felt dirtier than she ever had in her grease-stained apron. It was over. She had lost the money. She had lost her dignity. And tomorrow morning, Kenji Takahashi was going to walk into a room with a man who was being actively sabotaged by his own CFO, and he was going to sign away his family legacy. Sarah stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue, the city noise washing over her. She wanted to go home, crawl under her duvet, and forget the name Sterling Paris existed. But as she reached into her pocket for her subway card, her fingers brushed against something else. The Mont Blanc pen. Sterling had lent it to her yesterday to make notes, and she hadn't returned it. She looked at the pen. It was heavy, expensive, and solid. Sarah thought about Kenji's Yamaki pine, the tree that survived the fire because its roots were deep. She wasn't a waitress anymore. Sterling had been right about one thing. She was a killer. She just hadn't realized who the target was yet. She looked back up at the skyscraper. The lights on the 34th floor were still burning. No, Sarah whispered to herself. She wasn't going home. She turned and walked into an all-night internet cafe 2 doors down from Paris Holdings. She sat down at a sticky keyboard, pulled out the Montblanc pen and started writing. She had 12 hours until the signing. If she couldn't save herself, she was at least going to burn Veronica Vale to the ground. Friday morning, 9 a.m. The main boardroom of Paris Holdings was a masterpiece of intimidation architecture. The table was 20 feet of polished mahogany. The windows offered a panoramic view of a city that seemed conquered by the people in this room. Sterling Paris sat at the head of the table. He looked immaculate, renovated by sleep and amphetamines. The panic of last night was locked away behind a veneer of supreme confidence. To his right sat Veronica Vale, cool and composed in a cream-colored suit. The rest of the Paris team, lawyers, bankers, analysts, filled one side of the table, a phalanx of grey suits. The double doors opened. Kenji Takahashi entered. He was wearing a traditional black silk kimono bearing his family crest. It was a massive power move in a room full of Western suits. He was flanked by his 2 sons and the nervous translator from the restaurant. Everyone stood. Bows were exchanged. Kenji took his seat opposite Sterling. He looked around the room slowly, his eyes taking in every face. Then he frowned. He spoke in Japanese to his translator. "Mr. Takahashi asks," the translator said, her voice tinny in the large room. "Where is Sarah-san?" He understood she would be present for the final review. Sterling didn't miss a beat. He put on a look of polite regret. "Ah, yes. Most unfortunate. Sarah came down with a severe flu overnight. Very contagious. She sent her deepest apologies, but she is bedridden. We wouldn't want to risk your health, Kenji." It was a smooth lie. Veronica nodded sympathetically. Kenji's face remained impassive. He stared at Sterling for a long, uncomfortable moment. "The pine tree," Kenji said in slow, deliberate English, "thrives in the cold. It does not catch flu easily." Sterling's smile tightened. "Well, people aren't trees, Kenji. Shall we proceed? We have the final papers ready." The lawyers slid 4 thick binders across the polished wood. Kenji did not touch them. He placed his hands flat on the table. "Before we sign," Kenji said through the translator, "I have one final question regarding the Kyoto facility. Sarah-san assured me that the spirit of the research division would be protected. Can you confirm the exact wording of the protection clause?" Sterling looked at Veronica. This was the technical detail they had scrubbed the previous day. Veronica leaned forward, projecting confident competence. "Mr. Takahashi, we have removed the ambiguous timeframes. The contract now states that Paris Holdings commits to maintaining the Kyoto R&D division as a core asset for the foreseeable future, provided it meets standard performance metrics." It was a perfectly corporate, perfectly meaningless answer. Foreseeable future meant nothing. Performance metrics meant they could gut it whenever they wanted. Kenji closed his eyes. A heavy silence fell over the room. The air conditioning hummed. When Kenji opened his eyes, they were hard as flint. He reached into the sleeve of his kimono and pulled out a sleek silver smartphone. Not his own. He placed it in the center of the table. "My associates received an interesting email this morning," the translator said, her voice trembling now. "From an anonymous source. It contained an audio file." Kenji pressed play on the phone. A voice filled the boardroom. It was unmistakably Veronica Vale's. The recording quality was crystal clear. "Look, Jang, stop lowballing me. You want the Kyoto robotics tech. You're going to have to pay for it. Paris is buying the whole cow tomorrow. Once the deal is signed, I'll carve out the R&D stake and serve it to you on a platter. Sterling won't even notice until it's gone. He's too busy posing for Forbes magazine. We'll structure it as a performance failure divestment in 6 months. But I want a 5% finder's fee wired to the Cayman account. Non-negotiable." The recording ended with the sound of Veronica laughing softly. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just gone off, right before the shockwave hits. Every eye in the room turned to Veronica. Her cream-colored suit seemed to drain of color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The cool, untouchable CFO was gone, replaced by a panicked animal caught in headlights. That's fake, Veronica whispered, her voice cracking. It's deepfake AI audio. Someone is trying to frame me. Sterling slowly stood up. He looked at Veronica, and the expression on his face was terrifying. It wasn't anger, it was the cold realization of total annihilation. Zhang, Sterling said, his voice hollow. Zhang Industries, our biggest competitor in Shanghai. He turned to Kenji. Kenji, I swear to you, I knew nothing about this. Kenji stood up slowly. He looked at Sterling with profound disappointment. A man who cannot manage his own house, Kenji said in English, cannot be trusted with mine. He beckoned to his sons. They stood up, leaving the binders untouched on the table. Kenji, wait, please, Sterling pleaded, losing all composure. We can fix this. I'll fire her right now. We'll rewrite the contract. Kenji stopped at the door. He turned back. You fired the wrong person, Mr. Paris, Kenji said. Sara-san told me the truth. You told me a lie about the flu. You have no honor. The deal is dead. Do not contact my family again. The heavy doors closed behind them with a sound like a coffin lid slamming shut. Sterling Paris was left alone in his magnificent boardroom, surrounded by his army of useless suits, the wreckage of his $300 million deal, and the woman who had destroyed it all. He looked at Veronica. She was weeping silently now. Get out, Sterling whispered. Sterling, Get out, he screamed, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. It crashed to the floor. If I see your face in this city again, I will spend every last dollar I have left ensuring you end up in federal prison. Veronica fled the room. Sterling walked to the window. He looked down at the city he thought he owned. His phone started buzzing in his pocket. Then the landline on the conference table started ringing. Then the phones of the lawyers started ringing. The news was out. The Takahashi deal had collapsed. Paris Holdings stock was already in freefall. The banks were calling. The wolves were at the door. Sterling Paris, the master of the universe, had lost everything in 10 minutes. And he knew, with a sickening certainty, exactly who was responsible. The waitress. The silence in the executive suite of Paris Holdings was heavier than the marble floors. Sterling Paris sat on the floor of his office, his back against the panoramic window. His tie was undone, his collar open. A bottle of Macallan 25, opened for a celebration that never happened, sat half empty beside him. His phone had stopped ringing an hour ago. The silence was worse. It meant the sharks had stopped circling and started feeding. The news was out. Paris Holdings deal collapses amid fraud scandal. His investors were pulling out. The banks were seizing his assets. By Monday morning, the locks would be changed. He looked at the city skyline. He had clawed his way up from a public school in the Bronx to the top of this tower, only to be thrown off the roof by his own CFO. And he had let the only person who warned him get thrown out onto the street. You look like hell, Sterling. Sterling didn't jump. He was too tired. He slowly turned his head toward the door. Sarah stood there. She wasn't wearing the Alexander McQueen suit anymore. She was back in her waitress uniform, black slacks, white shirt, and the apron folded over her arm. She looked exactly as she had the night he met her at L'Argent. Small, invisible, unimportant. Security let you up? Sterling asked, his voice rasping. Mike, the guard? He used to be a regular at a diner I worked at in Queens. He likes me better than he likes you, Sarah said, walking into the room. If you're here to gloat, get in line, Sterling muttered, taking a swig from the bottle. Veronica played me. She played us both. She's probably halfway to the Caymans by now, with the payout from Zhang Industries. She's not in the Caymans, Sarah said, pulling a chair over. She's in the conference room with the FBI. I called them 20 minutes ago. Sterling froze. You what? Corporate espionage is a federal crime, Sterling, and falsifying evidence to frame an employee. That's obstruction of justice. Veronica Vale isn't going to a tropical island. She's going to prison. Sterling laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. It doesn't matter. The damage is done. Kenji walked. The deal is dead. My reputation is trash. I'm finished. You're right, Sarah said calmly. Sterling Paris is finished, the arrogant CEO who listens to sycophants and fires the only people who tell him the truth. He died today. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. But the man who saved the Yamaki Pine, the man who was willing to let a waitress negotiate a $300 million contract, that man might still have a chance. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a phone. Not hers. I spoke to Kenji in the lobby, Sarah said. I told him the truth. I told him you were a fool, not a thief. I told him that if he walked away now, he wasn't just punishing you. He was punishing the thousands of workers in Kyoto who need this capital. Sterling sat up straighter. And? What did he say? He said he would listen, Sarah said, but not to you. He doesn't trust you anymore. Then who? Me? Sarah placed the phone on the floor between them. He's on the line right now, speakerphone. Sterling stared at the device like it was a live grenade. Mr. Takahashi. A pause, then the gravelly voice of Kenji Takahashi filled the silent office. I am here, Sarah-san. Sterling scrambled to his knees. Kenji, Mr. Takahashi, I am so sorry Silence, Kenji commanded. I am not talking to you, Paris-san. I am talking to your partner. Sterling looked at Sarah. Partner? Sarah ignored him. Takahashi-sama, we are prepared to offer a new clause. Paris Holdings will create a supervisory board for the Kyoto division. It will have veto power over any restructuring. And the chair of that board will be independent of Mr. Paris. And who will this chair be? Kenji asked. Sarah looked at Sterling. This was the moment. The coup. Me, Sarah said. I will serve as the Director of Cultural Integration. I will answer directly to you and the board. If Sterling tries to cut a single corner, I will have the authority to freeze his assets faster than the SEC. Sterling's mouth fell open. She was taking control of his company. In his own office. With his own client. Do you agree to these terms, Mr. Paris? Kenji asked. Do you surrender this authority to the waitress? Sterling looked at Sarah. He saw the intelligence, the grit, the absolute fearlessness. He realized that for the last 48 hours, he had been the amateur and she had been the professional. I agree, Sterling said, his voice steady. She knows the company better than I do. She's the only one who can save it. Good, Kenji said. Then come downstairs. My driver is waiting. We will sign the papers at the restaurant. I am hungry for soup. The line clicked dead. Sterling slumped back, exhaling a breath that shook his whole body. He looked at Sarah with genuine awe. You just took control of a third of my company. I saved 100% of your company, Sarah replied, standing up. My commission is going to be substantial, Sterling, and I want that $50,000 check reissued. With interest. Sterling started to laugh. It was a real laugh this time. He stood up and extended his hand. Deal. Partner. Sarah looked at his hand. Then she looked him in the eye. She didn't shake it yet. One more thing, she said. The next time we go to L'Argent, you pour the water. Sterling Paris, billionaire CEO, smiled. Yes, ma'am. Wow, I still get chills thinking about that moment in the boardroom. Sarah didn't just save a deal, she rewrote the rules of the game. This story reminds us of a powerful truth. Intelligence doesn't have a dress code. Sterling Paris almost lost a $300 million empire because he couldn't see past an apron. He thought power only wore a suit and tie. But real power is preparation. Real power is empathy. Real power is knowing the history of a bonsai tree when everyone else is looking at the stock price. Sarah teaches us that your current position doesn't define your potential. You might be pouring coffee today, but if you have the skills, the grit, and the courage to speak up when it matters, you can be sitting at the head of the table tomorrow. So here is my question for you. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job title or how you looked? Did you prove them wrong? I want to hear your Sarah moment in the comments below. Let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and high-stakes business, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story. We have a crazy one coming up next week about a janitor who accidentally solved a math problem that baffled MIT professors for a decade. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, Be like Sarah. Be undeniable.